Greetings, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for Palms of Pinellas. My name is James Stevenson. I'm with Pinellas County Parks and Conservation Resources, coming to you from Brooker Creek Preserve up here in the north of the county in Tarpon Springs, where you can find a few of Pinellas palms. Today's presentation, we will cover this fascinating group of plants. We're going to have a look at exactly what palms are, what makes a palm a palm. We'll peer into the ethnobotany of this fascinating group of plants, and that means we'll take a look at how humans have historically interacted with this group of plants, and we'll finish up with a look at some local species, both native and non-native. I normally, as a botanist, don't dive into horticultural topics. I don't generally discuss how to grow things on your own, much more concerned with explaining native plants in their natural ecosystems. But in this presentation, given that most palms in Pinellas are not native, where possible, I will offer you a few tips on taking care of some of these plants within your sphere of influence. So I hope that suits all of you gathered here today. One of you in particular I know is celebrating a particularly special day, and we're very glad that you're here. One of our valued volunteers here at the Brooker Creek Preserve Environmental Education Center. System. It's a system run by volunteers. So we'll start today with what is a palm? You probably haven't ever really thought to ask yourself that question. We kind of take these trees for granted. They're all over our public and private landscapes. What is a palm? Well, it's a group of plants that get their name for the palm of your hand. The word for the palm of your hand came first. And this group of plants, many of them have leaves that resemble the palm of your hand, and that lends its common name to this group of flowering plants. Flowering plants are the majority of the plants on Earth. Most of what you see when you look out the window is a type of flowering plant. Now, this might be immediately obvious if you're looking at a quote-unquote flower, but that also includes the grasses, the palms, the oak trees. All of these are flowering plants, and flowering plants have got a relationship with insects. You probably knew this already, that most flowering plants depend on insects to move pollen from one flower to the other to facilitate this pollination process that leads to flowering plants producing fruit. So palms belong to the group of plants that are known as flowering plants, and therefore they produce flowers that are visited by insects, and those flowers develop into fruit. This insect in this slide is the great purple hair streak. And palm flowers are produced in profusion and make lots and lots and lots of nectar. And they're great places to look for butterfly species and other pollinator species. Being flowering plants, of course, palms produce fruit. And some palm fruit is better known than other palm fruit. If you happen to grow or have you ever been around a queen palm in fruit, you know that the fruit of a queen palm tree is a bright orange, fleshy fruit that fall from the tree and make these huge piles under the tree of often rotten, often fermenting, bright orange fruit. You can smell the fermentation process quite often. The fruit of the queen palm is actually quite attractive to wildlife. including non-native wildlife like the rats. Rats generally like that large, sweet fruit of the queen palm. Another wildlife group that loves queen palm fruit are the coyotes. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. The queen palm fruit is a bright orange, fleshy fruit, like I described before. Other palms that produce fruit that might be a little bit more familiar and commercially available and commercially viable are the coconut. The coconut is the fruit of a palm tree, the coconut palm. The date is the fruit of the date palm tree. And betel nut, although is not a big part of Western culture, in Asian and Pacific cultures, betel nut is actually the fruit of the palm tree that produces these semi-soft fruit that actually contain compounds that make you a little dizzy. And humans love nothing more than to take plant extracts that make us dizzy. And betel nut is one of those things that can actually become an addictive substance. Not to venture too deep into the subject before we cover some basics, now that we establish that palm trees belong to the group of plants that are known as the flowering plants, science has divided those 400,000 different plants on Earth, 400,000 different flowering plants on Earth, into two very discrete groups. And those groups are the monocots. So all the flowering plants that belong to this group called the monocots have got things in common. This group includes the palm trees, onions and garlic. Orchids are in this group. Grasses are in this group. Bromeliads are in this group. These are all monocots. They all have characteristics of their flowers and of their structures that make them more alike to each other than they are to the other group of flowering plants, the dicots. And the dicots include all the different oak trees, all the different sunflowers and asters, all the different legumes and the roses and the cabbages. Most of our vegetables belong to this flowering group, the dicot. So these are two separate flowering plant groups. And within those groups, there are some pretty large subsets. So a subset of the monocots would be the orchids. A subset of the monocots would be the onions. A subset of the monocots would be the palms, and so on. So palms, like onions and orchids and bromeliads, are monocots. Oak trees, sunflowers, roses, legumes, cabbage, those are dicots. So a palm is no more a grass than an oak is a cabbage. I know a lot of people like to say that palms are a type of grass. They're not a type of grass. Palms are a type of palm. Palms are a type of monocot, and grasses are a type of monocot, and oaks are a type of dicot, and cabbage is a type of dicot. So to say a palm is a grass would be as equal to saying an oak tree is a cabbage. So let's dispel that myth number one. You get me? Palms are not grasses. They belong to the same group of flowering plants as grasses, but they are their own thing. So if palms aren't grasses, are they trees? I've also heard this kind of kicked around. Do we call palms trees or not? Well, yes, palms are trees. Palms are trees effectively. Correct answer is also palms. No, they are not trees. Not at all. Technically speaking, palms are not trees. So there is no yes or no answer that would be correct. It would depend on the application, whether or not a palm gets to be a tree or not. Effectively, palms are trees. Most species of palm are tall, like trees. Most have a single trunk, like many trees. They provide humans with shade and other wildlife with shade, shelter. Many palm trees provide us with food, like other trees do, and fiber and building materials like lumber. So, in that way, yes, palms are trees. They have a lot of the same economic or ethnobotanic uses that a tree that might belong to another group of plants might be. But technically speaking, palms are not trees. Botanically speaking, they don't get to be called trees because at their cellular level, they're not made right. They're not made like trees. Trees belong in the group called the dicots. And so, because of the structure of the stem and at the cellular level, the way that cells are arranged in the stem makes all the difference. It allows dicots to form a cambium and produce growth rings and produce bark. It allows the dicot group to branch. Palm trees don't branch. And it most importantly allows the dicot group to perform this wonderful feat called secondary thickening, which is the origin of true wood. So what is a palm trunk made of? It seems to be woody, even though it's not technically wood. Palm stems are made of very strong fibers. Palms are an incredibly fibrous group of plants. And those fibers form basically an unbroken stem of tiny, fine, hair-like fibers that are incredibly strong, but incredibly flexible. In fact, much more flexible than wood is the stem of a palm tree. The leaves of the palm tree, of palm trees, generally speaking, they might be shaped like the palm of your hand, that name that lends its description to the whole group. They might be palmate. But other species of palms have leaves that are shaped like a feather or a pin, like a feather pen. And they are called pinnately compound leaves. So either palmately or pinnately compound leaves, giant leaves. You look at the top of a palm tree and you think it's got all these branches that come out the top. Each of those that come out the top are individual leaves, and they're huge leaves. They're very, very, very large leaves, and they fold. You can see how the palmate frond there is folded up. That's a very unique characteristic of the palms as well. Even the feather-shaped or the pinnate leaves, when they're developing from a bud until a fully expanded leaf, they unfold to form that pinnate structure. If you were to back up and look at a palm tree from the ground, you could probably tell, now that I've told you, that the leaves are either palmate, like the palm of your hand, or pinnate, like a feather. The tree on the left has palmate leaves coming from the crown, no branches, just leaves coming from the single crown at the top of the stem. And the pinnate leaves of the coconut palm on the right, you can see, are feather-shaped. That leaf shape would be unique to a species. So all the coconut palms are going to have those pinnate leaf shapes. And all the cabbage palms, for example, would have the palmate leaf shape. It's one of the characteristics that help us tell palms apart. Do they have palmate-shaped leaves or pinnate-shaped leaves. And the leaves of palm trees are the largest leaves of any plant in the world. In fact, the largest leaf in the world belongs to a species of palm called Raphia regalis. It's an African species, and a single leaf can reach from underground up to about 80 feet in the air. So a single leaf, a single photosynthetic solar catcher for this plant. Here is a couple of raffia or raffia palm trees growing at the edge of a pond, giving you an idea with humans for scale just how big these leaves can get of this particular species. So they're record breakers. Those naturally broken leaves that are separated into little segments, either palmately compounded or pinnately compounded leaves, and the fibrous trunk have suited the palms as a group to living in tropical areas. The flexible nature of the stem, given that it's made primarily of fibers, and the already shredded leaves, they come pre-shredded as they grow on the plant, allow these plants to bend and sway and be bandied about in strong tropical wind. And palm trees evolved in tropical areas where tropical storms were not and are not unusual. So they are already pre-adapted to surviving. They are adapted to life in rather boisterous tropical climates. Living in tropical climates, often close to the water, at least one species has decided to turn to the ocean to get some of its necessary life cycle carried out. The coconut palm produces a fruit that is so large, there is no animal that could help disperse the seed that is inside. So the coconut palm has traded animal dispersion for a giant seed that can be carried for hundreds of miles on the ocean. And the ocean is the dispersal mechanism for the coconut. Because coconut is water dispersed and is oceanic, we're not really sure where the first coconut tree developed. They are found all around the Pacific Ocean because they have traveled all these millions of years all throughout the Pacific Ocean. And wherever that palm land, it germinates and begins to grow into a palm tree. And where that plant germinates and grows, palm trees then become incredibly useful for any humans who might also find themselves washing ashore in the same location. What stimulates a coconut to begin to germinate after a long voyage at sea? Well, the coconut milk or the coconut water that is found inside the seed is not unique to coconuts, but it's a feature of coconuts, this liquid endosperm, this liquid seed food sloshes around as long as that fruit is floating in the water. And as soon as the coconut lands on dry land, that sloshing stops. And the sloshing stopping stimulates the little embryo to germinate. It's a signal to the embryo that we've landed. It's okay to grow. You can put some roots down now. And so as soon as that coconut stops moving, it puts down a root, it puts up its first shoot, and a new coconut is on the way. Palms as a group of flowering plants arrived about 70 or 80 million years ago, based on what we have learned from the fossil record. Both fossilized palm leaves and flowers, and discovering palm pollen in ancient sediments has helped define an age of this group of flowering plants. And they go way, way back. So around the time this dinosaur called Edmontosaurus was coming on the scene and becoming the herbivorous dinosaur that it became, palm trees were finding their own and speciating and spreading throughout the tropical climate that was around the same time. These pre pre-adapted characteristics that allowed these plants to be much, much taller and therefore much, much closer to the sun, therefore able to photosynthesize better. So it left all of its fellow monocots, like the grasses and the orchids and the bromeliads, behind on the ground. The palms figured out a way to produce a fibrous trunk and get taller and get closer to the sun and to outcompete the neighbors, and became this group of flowering plants that we today know as the many different species of palm. How many species in the world? Over 2,500 different types of palm trees. So wherever there's a tropical climate, there's a handful or a dozen or 2 dozen palm tree species. There are some palm trees that are actually adapted to desert conditions. And there are a small few palm trees that have actually adapted to living in colder climates, further towards the North Pole. There's an Asian and a European species, Trachycarpus, the snow palm, that is actually adapted. But generally speaking, they like to stay warm and they like to live near the water. Okay? That's what a palm is. Isn't that cool? Any cool things there? I hope you picked up something slightly interesting. Let's just briefly touch on what's not a palm, because there's a few plants out there in the landscape that are referred to as palms that are not. It doesn't matter that people call them palms until you get down to their care and feeding. These plants, I don't even know what they're called. Sago palm, I believe, is their common name. Actually, a group of plants that predates flowering plants by a couple million years. These are cycads. These are true Jurassic plants. They're called sago palms. There's a product called sago that can be produced from their seeds. They don't have folded leaves. The cycads have an uncurling rather than unfolding habit. More importantly, they're put together completely differently and they reproduce completely differently. The cycads arrived at a time before insects and before any pollination syndromes that were provided by insects. These plants make cones, like the other ancient conifers that we're so familiar with. So the sago palm is not, it's a cycad. They behave differently. They live differently. They just happen to have a trunk and a plume of leaves at the top. They're superficially similar to palms, but they are not true palms. But let's talk about now how palms and people have found a way to live together. And that's called the ethnobotany, and the ethnobotany of palms, and the way that we ascertain various ethnobotanical uses of plants is obviously through the oral tradition, through where possible the written tradition, and finally through the archaeological record. So we look for traces of utensils or artifacts that might have been created from found objects that were available to the people that are being studied. And palm fragments have been found in ancient cultures. And thankfully, we haven't messed up too much. And there are still people that kind of live on their own on this planet with their own botanical uses of plants, ethnobotanical uses of plants. And I chose just one example. There's over 2,500 different species of palms, and there are human populations, of course, all over the tropical areas. But I thought this particular group of people they are called the maroon people in Brazil, in South America. These people still use traditional products from palm trees. And these people are a mix of an African population that was introduced into South America and the native indigenous peoples. So this is a mixture of people who have also kind of blended their own ethnobotanical uses of palms. And this one palm, so this one population and how they use this one palm will illustrate a very brief introduction to the ethnobotanical uses of humans and palms. So this is the use of the Muritia palm by the maroon people in Brazil. Of course, the number one thing that people need is food. And palms produce fruit. And so obviously, in many cases, where palatable, those fruit are used as food. The Mauritia palm actually provides several different consumables. A liquid is extracted from the trunk, and it's called wine. It's not fermented. It's not an alcoholic beverage. They just refer to it as a wine. And they can also take the stem tissue. After killing the tree, you can take the stem tissue and extract a starch from that stem. The flesh of the fruit of the Mauritia palm can be eaten raw. It can be juiced, used to make sugar or sweets, or mixed with other ingredients to make a particular dish. Inside the fruit, there's a single seed. Just like all palm trees, the fruit is rather large and there's a single seed inside, like a date. The seed itself can be eaten raw, or it could be dried and ground into and made into a beverage. So all sorts of sources of things that the Mauritia palm can provide for food. Obviously, having that fibrous trunk, palms can be useful in construction, making structures. So the stems are still used by these peoples to build chicken enclosures, to make utensils around the home, to buoy up and bolster building structures. Of course, the leaves can be used and are used all over the place due to their large size and their fibrous and long, withstand their longevity, their resistance to decay. Very good roofing or thatching material. And otherwise, large palm-shaped leaves, very useful in making utensils that can be used to, keep yourself cool. So lots of uses there as well. Perhaps the most interesting to most people are medicinal uses of plants, and the Mauritia palm doesn't disappoint in this regard. The wine, or that liquid that's extracted from the stem, is used by the maroon people to treat diabetes. The extracts from the roots are used to treat aches and pains. The leaf stem can be squeezed and a juice can be extracted from the leaf petiole. And these people believe and use this against snake bites. And oil extracted from the fruit has a lot of medicinal applications for the maroon people. Lots of respiratory complaints, and pneumonia, coughing spells, things like that, flu, and heart problems. And that drink that's made from the seeds, that coffee-like drink that's made from the dried seeds of the fruit, that beverage is used to help women during childbirth. I wasn't able to uncover any modern research or double-blind pharmacological research into these applications, but it's serving the maroon people. They're still around and they still believe and use these products for those purposes. Closer to home, we have an archaeological dig on the East Coast that was found kind of by accident. If you've lived in this area for a long time, you may have heard of Eckerd Drug Store, Eckerd Drugs. Jack Eckerd, very successful pharmacist, has set up a series of grocery stores. His son was, like many successful Floridians, a developer. And so Jack Eckerd Jr. was out prospecting on the East Coast, and his either himself or his enterprise made a discovery of human remains. And of course, construction development was halted. And upon further investigation, one of the oldest burial sites in North America was discovered right here in Florida. And among the artifacts within this underwater burial were textiles that were still preserved, and those textiles were made from palm fibers. So a very exciting find, very rich in human history. I'll provide a link to this article at the end so that you might want to read more about this. It's an area called Windover. It's not far from Titusville over on the East Coast. You can read about it in the winter 2018 edition of Reflections magazine, which is a locally produced magazine from that area around Titusville. Here's where Windover is, if you can get your bearings. East of Orlando, west of the Kennedy Space Center. It's now an archaeological, a very popular, famous archaeological site. Modern ethnobotanical relationship with palms, by and large, palm oil. Almost every human on Earth consumes palm oil in one way or another. A majority of processed food in this country contains palm oil. Palm oil is produced in great quantities, making it very inexpensive. Therefore, it is a very popular additive into foods, into processed foods. Palm oil is a very dense substance, and palm plantations are very densely planted. So a lot of tonnage can be gained from a small amount of palm oil plantation. An obscene amount can be obtained from a large palm oil plantation. And humans always want more. More. So we have hundreds of millions of acres of palm oil plantation. And of course, this palm loves to grow in the tropics. And so it's the tropical forests that are being converted into palm oil plantations at the expense of the local species that would have been found there. So have a look at the label of your processed food, see if it's got palm oil in it, and make some choices. Perhaps make some decisions about supporting that endeavor in your own life. And we'll finish up today with some local palm species. Some of the things that you'll see just driving down the road that you've kind of always taken for granted. You just drive past a palm tree. It's just a palm tree. It's just a palm tree. Let's meet a few of the local species, find out a little bit about them. If there's some of these species that might be within your sphere of influence, get to know them a little bit better, maybe something they might need. And if any of these species are not in your sphere of influence, maybe consider introducing one or two of these species because of their ecological benefits. This is a photograph of downtown St. Petersburg. Pinellas County has a pretty enviable tree canopy, despite being a very urbanized county. We're pretty good about planting trees. We're pretty good about keeping a nice, healthy tree canopy throughout the county. What you can see in this picture is a line of Canary Island date palms lining this street. Here's another set of Canary Island date palms growing there. Pretty obvious silhouette. One of our two native palm species that's native to Pinellas County. We only have two. We have about a dozen total palm species that are native to Florida, but only two are native to Pinellas County. One of those is the cabbage palm. And if you don't have a cabbage palm in your sphere of influence, I would like to invite you to change that. If you could plant one tree in your life, I would recommend planting a cabbage palm, simply because of its ecological services and the fact that it is completely suited for dry conditions like a desert or completely submerged in fresh water. This is a plant that has evolved in Central Florida and can live in wet, dry conditions. It's a beautiful lollipop-shaped, one of many lollipop-shaped palm trees with a very strong, upright trunk and a spherical crown of palmate-shaped leaves. A lot of those leaf bases might persist on the trunk, and that's what the central picture is here. Those are called the boots, and each of the palm leaves, when it falls from the plant, might leave the leaf base behind as this kind of wishbone-shaped boot. Within those boots, organic matter collects and actually decomposes and composts into a very rich soil. And other plants can then thrive like little aerial hanging baskets in the boots of these cabbage palms. There are ferns like the golden-foot polypody that are evolved to live just there in the boots of the cabbage palm. Wildlife gets habitat in these boots and in the crown of the cabbage palm. The cabbage palm also is very similar to some other palm species. What's unique about the cabbage palm is the leaf stem extends into the leaf as a long, tapering, finger-like projection. And that's a very good way to identify a cabbage palm. If you have a large single-trunked, palmate-leaved palm tree. And if it's a cabbage palm, be glad, because it's doing so much. Those huge inflorescences that have millions of flowers produce gallons of nectar, so beneficial to our native pollinators. The fruit is an important resource for some native mammals like possums and raccoons, and some bird species as well love to feast on the fruit when they're produced late summer. Unfortunately, there is a myth, our myth number 2 for today. Number 1, palms are not grasses. Myth number 2, palms should be pruned ahead of hurricane season. Nothing could be further from true. Remember, our palms are evolved to withstand tropical weather. It's what they're made for. Taking away perfectly healthy leaves from the crown of a cabbage palm only weakens that plant, only removes habitat, only removes next year's flowering stalks, depriving natives of a nectar source. So, ever trimming a palm, a cabbage palm in particular, absolutely unnecessary and highly unrecommended by professionals and those of us who care about the environment. Our other native palm is the saw palmetto. That's our other native palm in Pinellas County. And unlike most palms, this species does branch. And it does not tend to form a single, strong, upright trunk. Instead, it kind of scurries around along the ground and branches as it goes. Why has it evolved this particular growth habit? Because fire. The saw palmetto is completely adapted to fire and can burn to the ground and resprout very, very quickly. If one growing tip is damaged or killed by fire, each stem has several new growing points. It is thought that the saw palmetto, an individual saw palmetto, can reach more than 500 years of age. It just continually grows, burns back, and grows and burns back. So a healthy saw palmetto is very short. Where it is not burned, it can grow into a huge thicket. Saw palmetto does produce, like all other palms, huge inflorescences of thousands of flowers, rich in nectar and pollen, very attractive to native pollinators, butterflies, native bees, and that sort of thing. The fruit of the saw palmetto, again, a single seeded, very large drupe, like a big berry with one seed. The fruit of the saw palmetto has been used by several cultures for thousands of years for gentlemen's complaints. Recent research has yet to prove the efficacy of any extract of this fruit, but it is still being researched. It could very well be that we just haven't figured out the right test yet. We haven't tested the right extract yet. We haven't invented the right procedure or double-blind test. But certain peoples will swear by the efficacy of this plant and its medicinal value. There's a silver form of the saw palmetto, which has these beautiful glaucous leaves, taken from a population on the east coast of Florida. So technically, the silver saw palmetto is not a Pinellas County native, but it still, in every other sense, is the same species and is perfectly welcome in landscapes. Another silver-leaved palm might be familiar to some. It's called the Bismarckia, or the Bismarck palm. This is a Madagascaran species, and it is a monster. Each leaf is probably 10 feet by 10 feet, a single leaf. Those are produced by the 10s, 20s, 30s among the crown. The trunk can be 6 feet in diameter, and these trees can get to be quite tall, 60 feet tall. They look very cute at the nursery, and they're often planted maybe close to the house or right next to the mailbox because it's just this pretty little silver palm tree, but they'll end up being quite monstrous. Like I said, they are from Madagascar. They also have a dark green leafed form, but it's this silver leafed form that is used most ornamentally. And I'll use the Bismarck palm to illustrate just how precious the non-native species are. Palm trees, having evolved near the coast and have evolved to withstand tropical storms and everything that comes with it, have developed or have evolved alongside soils that are very rich in very strange micronutrients. Living near the ocean, palms have historically had access to some strange micronutrients. And if they don't get those micronutrients, it can become very obvious. So Bismarckia will be our representative palm, and it will illustrate what it looks like to have a magnesium deficiency, what it looks like to have a potassium deficiency, what it looks like to have a manganese deficiency, what it looks like to have a boron deficiency. Our native palms, they could care less about these, or they get enough of these from our native soils, but these other palms have a much bigger hunger for these micronutrients and will not thrive without them. UF has created a fact sheet about fertilizing your palms, your non-native, your exotic non-native species of palms. If you are suffering, if your palms are suffering, perhaps it's an issue with their fertilizer. There's a fact sheet on this, the 8 to 12. The way that these nutrients are delivered to the palm makes a huge difference in their efficacy. So I would certainly recommend reading up on correct fertilizer of palms from research done at the University of Florida, not by asking the very well-intending people at the garden center, because they just want to sell you something. UF wants to make sure that you're using the right thing. And of course, in Pinellas County, we do not use fertilizer between June 1st and September 30th at all, no matter what. Here's the blog called Selecting Good Fertilizers for Palms. Easy enough subject to search as long as you put UF, IFAS, in the search, you will get that. Our most ubiquitous palm in Pinellas County happens to be a species that's not native. It seems like we took down all the cabbage palms and planted a whole bunch of queen palms. Not exactly sure why. Well, I have an idea. Queen palms are very easy to grow. They're easy to propagate. Every single seed germinates, and the plants grow pretty fast. So it makes them a horticultural dream. A nurseryman can produce thousands of baby queen palms every year and sell every single one of them. So they do. And we plant them because they are inexpensive. So the county is covered in queen palms. Unfortunately, queen palm has revealed herself to be something of an invasive species. Remember when I talked earlier about the queen palm producing that orange fruit that often ferments? It falls to the ground and ferments. Few get carried away by rats, a few get carried away by possums and raccoons, but the coyotes, they love the fruit of the queen palm, and they will carry the seeds in their tummy for miles back to the den. And coyotes have been responsible for, quote unquote, planting queen palms in our natural areas as long as the coyotes have been in Pinellas County. So our wild areas are becoming choked with queen palms because the coyotes have such a predilection for their fruit. We're not going to get rid of the coyotes, but we can start to get rid of the queen palm. Between disease and windstorms, we're beginning to see queen palms kind of fall out of fashion. If you have one within your sphere of influence, we would recommend removing the fruit stalks while they're still green and throwing it away. Don't let the fruit ripen and get into the tummy of a coyote. That's a good way to prevent the spread of the queen palm into our natural areas. A palm that looks very similar to the queen palm, it also has a pinnate leaf, like a feather. The leaf of the foxtail palm is more three-dimensional. It's more like a feather duster than a flat feather. The foxtail palm also, when it's mature, flowers and produces these orange fruits. The foxtail palm hasn't shown signs of becoming invasive yet, but it also hasn't been particularly successful in our coldest winters. The foxtail palm is actually a native of Australia, and it proves that when we have a very, very severe cold snap, it could kill a foxtail palm. One of our most revered, and certainly one of our most expensive palms, the statuesque Canary Island date palm. These line municipal streets, run down medians, provide shade, provide wonderful photographic moments. The Canary Island date palm, very stately, and like I said, incredibly expensive to plant. To purchase a mature plant upwards in the, how many digits are those? Three, in the 5-digit range each plant, $20,000 each. And they can be quite striking, of course, but they are from the Canary Islands, which are not here. The Canary Islands, of course, off the coast of Spain. This is one of those palms that requires particular fertilizers in order to thrive. Otherwise, they go into a decline, or they kind of pout, or they fall apart, which is not good for anyone. This is actually in Tampa. The top came out, it rotted, of a Canary Island date palm, a $30,000 Canary Island date palm. Here are a handful of the diseases and pests that the Canary Island date palm are susceptible to: weevils, fungus, butt rot, yellowing, which is a bacterial disease, and the Texas phoenix palm decline. Most of these diseases are lethal. And yet we continue to spend the 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s thousands of dollars to plant these in our communities, when a cabbage palm would be even better and have much more ecological services. A relative of the Canary Island date palm is the pygmy date palm. And in this photograph, you can actually see quite a few species of palm in one photograph. The one in the foreground is this pygmy date palm. That's as big as it gets, about 6-7 feet tall. It's not going to get any bigger. It's not going to turn into a Canary Island date palm. This species is naturally small, Phoenix roebelenii. In the distance, on the left, you can see the areca palm. Next to that, the royal palm with some kind of deficiency appearing in its crumpled up leaf there. This looks like a Canary Island date palm, and this looks to be a Christmas palm. So this looks to be some sort of a collection of exotic species of palms all together. But the pygmy date palm, very popular landscape plant as a foundation plant. They don't grow very fast. They're purchased mature, and they don't change very much over time. However, they can change in that they too can express nutrient deficiencies in the absence of a bespoke fertilizer made just for palms. Another phoenix species in the genus Phoenix, the Canary Island, the pygmy, and the Senegal date palm. This date palm also produces a fruit, also very attracted to birds and other wildlife, and has become an invasive species. This is a multiple trunked palm. Its scientific name, reclinata, refers to the fact that many times the trunks will grow a bit horizontally, with the crowns then reaching back upward. So you can see these reclining palms, very likely the Senegal date palms, in the wintertime, producing very, very showy, lovely clusters of orange berries. Like I said, these berries are attractive to birds. That makes them have an ecological service, right? They're providing for birds. Until these plants begin showing up in our natural areas and outcompeting for space. That makes them a problem in our natural areas. If you wanted the same effect of a multiple trunked palm tree, borrow a species from South Florida. The Everglades palm would be a good choice. This one is evolved to live in Florida, although its natural range is south of Lake Okeechobee. With our warmer and warmer summers, this plant will be finding it more and more amenable to reach further north, and the Everglades palm might become naturally established. It is already used as a landscape plant to great success. It does not, however, have the beautiful bright orange fruit in the wintertime. Instead, it opts for a little more subtle approach. Royal palms are another of our South Florida native palm trees. These you'll see as soon as you cross the Sunshine Skyway Bridge. They're used very much ornamentally. They are quite striking with their smooth and bright trunks. The leaf base of the royal palm clasps the stem for about 5 feet, 4 or 5 feet of leaf base that clasps the stem. That's that kind of green section beneath each leaf. It's connected to the leaf just above it. These trees, however, do appear to be exhibiting nutrient deficiencies. You can see some of their leaves are stunted, they're a little bit frizzled, they look a little bit electrocuted. It could have something to do with one of those micronutrient deficiencies because the soils up here don't match what they're used to down in the south of Florida. The very, very tall, tall palms found along causeways throughout the county are the Washingtonias, named for our very own George Washington. And they are a North American native species. So why have I got the red slash? Why are they invasive? These are native to the west coast and the desert southwest. Here in Florida, they have access to rainfall like they've never seen before. And they produce copious amounts of fruit and thus seeds that find their way into bird bellies and get transported throughout the county. And so the Washingtonia genus, there's 2 different species, the giant tall Washingtonia robusta and the slightly stockier Washingtonia foliifera. Both species are native to the West and both have become a slight problem in Florida as far as becoming invasive species. They are quite happy surviving here. They are wind tolerant, given their flexible stems and their wind-proof leaves. The Washingtonia foliifera, this one will very often have a petticoat of dead leaves that might cover the entirety of the trunk. That does provide an ecological service. That is wonderful habitat for bats and for screech owls to roost and to build nests and to raise young. So it's always a toss-up. Providing plenty of our own native cabbage palm would provide the same ecological services. So it would, without risking an invasive species situation. Areca. This is the genus that gives its name to the entire family of palm trees, the Ericaceae. Lutescens in its name refers to the golden yellow of the leaves, the leaf petioles and the leaf rachis. These parts of the leaves, here's the petiole and here's the rachis. Very lovely, sometimes called bamboo palms. These make very dense thickets, very successful privacy hedges until it freezes. They don't like that. They very often rebound, but it will take probably a full 12 months before you get over the areca burn um, of a frozen bank of Dipsis lutescens. Finishing up, we're coming to the end of the year. We're coming to the end of the presentation. We're coming to Christmas and the Christmas palm. A specimen plant, for sure, would be an expensive landscape addition. They are sometimes used in ornamental plantings as a show-off plant. They are cut a very striking silhouette, very interesting shaped pinnate leaves with a prominent boiled shrimp curl. Best known for their fruit, which is a fire engine red, and it's produced from now through the new year. So it's almost pre-decorated for holidays with this bright red clusters of fruit. Like many, this is a species that's native to the Philippines and Malaysia. So it would require that extra TLC. Watering during the wet season if we're in a drought, and that additional micronutrient fertilizing. But an interesting plant just the same. The Chinese fan palm, this one has a red slash, very easily confused with our cabbage palm. It gets to be about the same size. It has a palmate leaf. But the way that you can recognize the fan palms are those incredibly long and dramatic drip tips that drip off the tips of their palmately shaped leaves. This is not from around here, given its common name, Chinensis, Chinese fan palm, and also very susceptible to nutrient deficiency. We have more palms we could talk about, but I have been instructed to leave you alone after an hour. So I will go and do that now. For more reading on the subject, we would like to point you in the direction of the UF IFAS fact sheets. There are a few palm experts that are still churning out research and information about growing palms in Central Florida. So, an overview of palms for Central Florida, and then individual fact sheets about the various species, giving you information on how to prune palms. The answer is don't. How to feed palms, choosing a fertilizer, and so on. A wealth of information from your local extension office in Largo or from online by searching for these subjects with IFAS included in the search bar. On the left, my favorite palm, the cabbage palm, being very happy and unpruned and unfertilized and doing just fine and providing tons and tons of ecological services in the wild. And on the right, the same species thriving, providing ecological services, and will outlast the ribbon palms, the Chinese fan palms, the little pygmy date palms that are sharing the location with them. Given the change in the climate, the cabbage palm is pre-adapted to these changes and will continue to thrive in our area. Some of the references in today's presentation, if you would like to write to me, I can certainly provide the source material for anything you heard today. We can send you also links to some of the information that was presented today. Palms of Central Florida, how to select a fertilizer, Palms of the World online, and that study of the Mauritia palm and its ethnobotanical uses in Central America. So With that, I will let you go. I hope you have a great afternoon and a wonderful rest of the year. Never hesitate to reach out. My email address is my first initial and last name, J. Stevenson at Pinellas.gov. Appreciate your attention this afternoon, and we hope to see you again sometime. Thanks for tuning in and keep us posted. Thanks a lot.